verses of today's Gospel pick up from where we left off last week. That reading ended with Jesus' little parable about the rich fool who tore down his barns to build bigger barns, only to find that his life was being demanded of him. This reading begins with Jesus' soothing admonition to sell our possessions and give alms and make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. This is quite a contrast to two brothers fighting over an inheritance, or a rich person gloating over fabulous amounts of wealth. Lest we think Jesus is asking us to make ourselves miserable, Jesus assures us that it is our heavenly Abba's pleasure to give us a treasure that is the kingdom. If this treasure, the kingdom, is the Abba's pleasure, then it is our pleasure as well. It is important to see that Jesus is not telling us to give up desires. The heavenly Abba has a profound desire for a deep union of love with each of us. A union would have us share with each other. If God is comprised of God's desire, then it follows that we creatures are created with desires. What Jesus is doing here is redirecting our desires from the desires of rivalrous avarice towards God's desire that is without rivalry. Isn't every fight ultimately over what we think we are entitled to as our inheritance? Yet aren't we all offered the whole world to be an inheritance rather than a bone for contention? Since these rivalrous desires embroil us with our rivals, the material inheritance we are fighting for is destroyed as if by moths. Of course, each rival blames the other for being the thief that has stolen the treasure. Jesus then shifts to an admonition to be ready for the Master's return from the wedding banquet. If we servants are alert and ready to greet the Master will wait on us as Jesus waited on his disciples at the Last Supper. This little feast shared by Master and servants is an image of the treasure our hearts should be set on. The progression of vignettes and admonitions throughout this chapter suggest that the best way to be prepared for God's coming is to set our hearts on treasure that moths cannot consume and thieves cannot steal. Fundamentally, being alert for the Master consists of serving one another in the same way that the Master serves us when he comes. The following little parable is comical and a bit threatening. The Master who serves those who wait for him is transformed into a thief breaking into a house in the middle of the night. If our hearts are not set on the treasure of serving one another, but instead we fight over our inheritance and try to gather it into bigger barns, then the God who serves us will be quite alien to us and will be perceived as a thief, a burglar. If our rivalry deepens, as it does in the still more threatening parable that follows, so that rivalry causes us to beat the other slaves, men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk, then the gracious Master will indeed rob us of our victims. God is both a burglar and a gracious Master who serves. God only breaks in to take away all that draws our hearts away from God and from each other. What this burglar leaves in return is a treasure well worth setting our hearts on.